COVID-19 cases are high and it's overwhelming our healthcare system. The caregivers at San Juan Regional Medical Center need your help.
Our resources are exhausted. We're very limited on what we have the capacity to do because we're being overwhelmed with the number of individuals that are requiring ICU care at this point.
So what can you do to help? Most importantly, ignore the rhetoric and get vaccinated.
Continue hand washing, continue to wear your mask and social distance.
Help us so we can help you.
Ten minutes past 8 o'clock. It is Wednesday morning, the 9th day of February, 2022. Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Michlin. Thanks for tuning in to KSJE 90.9 FM over the air, of course, here in San Juan County, New Mexico. Streaming everywhere on the planet from KSJE.com. And we welcome our viewers who are watching this visual radio program. The video is streaming out live this morning to the KSJE Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and our Twitter account. We are glad that you are with us, everybody. Good morning, and thank you for being here. Coming up in the next few moments, my guest this morning from San Juan Regional Medical Center. We're going to be talking about ways to fight off depression during these dark days of winter. That and more coming up in the next few moments right here on KSJE. And then later on this hour, Ron Price will be returning for his weekly visit with me about life in the sandbox. This morning, Ron is talking about the double reverse. We'll hear more about that coming up today at 8:50 on KSJE. Next hour, it's Roving with the Arts, our classical music program. Mick Hess is featuring music today from Anton Bruckner. Bruckner's Symphony No. 5 on the program today, a special 90-minute version because that will take us to 10:30 and our local and regional author program right on Four Corners. And Tracy Hales-Vass is speaking with author Manuel Gonzalez today. He is one of the poet laureates for the city of Albuquerque. He'll be sharing some of his poems and musings on the program today at 10:30 right here on KSJE. Don't forget, of course, we invite you to connect with us on our Instagram page in addition to Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. And if you're a podcast person, you can subscribe for free to KSJE Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. So check those out as well. Outside our studios this morning, it is a partly sunny morning in Farmington at the moment, 21 degrees. We are expecting a mostly sunny day today with some increasing clouds this afternoon. 53 degrees for a high today, 21 and clearing overnight, sunny and 54 tomorrow. Take a look at Friday with a high near 60 degrees, 58 and sunshine on Friday, partly sunny and 54 on Saturday, 57 on Sunday, and we might hit 60 by Monday with sunny skies and overnight lows again in the mid to lower 20s. Well, let me introduce my guests who are here with me this morning, as I mentioned, from San Juan Regional Medical Center. We welcome back to the KSJE microphone. Chaplain Linda Stetter is here from the hospital. Good morning. Thank you for coming in. Good to have you back.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and Happy New Year.
You too.
Right. Thank you very much. Tammy Cagle is also here. She is a licensed clinical social worker at San Juan Regional Medical Center. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Welcome back to you as well.
Thank you.
And Happy New Year to you.
You too. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for coming in to talk with me a little bit about depression. And just here we are in February. And as we were talking before we came on the air this morning, the days are still kind of short, and Christmas is over, and bills are due, and COVID continues, and all these things that just pile on and pile on and pile on, and February can be a pretty tough month for folks, right? And that's no secret to you both, I know.
Right.
You're dealing with it all the time.
That's right, Scott. So what we want to do today is provide a little self-awareness for everybody in our community, because the fact is traumatic stress, and I think everybody's had their share of that from COVID and the cold weather and other things that have happened. Traumatic stress and depression and grief can sneak in. They're very subtle, and all of a sudden one day people can wake up and go, I'm really miserable, I feel terrible, what's happened, this is not who I am, how do I help myself? Because it's very subtle. It can sneak in over a period of time, and we'd like to help people understand what that looks like a little bit better and how they can help themselves and help each other through it.
Right. And you mentioned that some people can maybe wake up and realize that's happening, but I imagine for some, maybe they may not even realize that they are feeling bad and just blah and depressed, and they haven't recognized that it is some type of actual depression maybe that's going on.
That's absolutely correct. And that's where our sense of belonging comes in, because as human beings, our biggest need is to know that we belong. We belong in a family. We belong maybe in a class here or a dormitory. We belong in a church congregation. We belong in a profession. We belong places. And that helps our world make sense and gives it order. And when stress comes along, and when things like COVID come along, and when depression comes along, it disconnects us from those things that make sense in our lives. And sometimes it can happen over time, and we're the last people to know it. So we depend on those people who surround us in our community, our church, our profession, our neighborhood, to tell us, to be our best Valentines ever, and to tell us, you might need a little helping hand with
Right.
this. You might need to look at this because there's something different about you and you're not your usual self, and to do it in a kind and loving way.
Right. I think that's a great point. And I think throughout COVID, some of those connections may have been severed. We may have not have wanted them to be severed, but it was just a fact of the situation of the world we were living in and still live in with COVID. If you couldn't go to work, if you couldn't send your kid to school, if you couldn't hang out with your friends, all those usual social connections that revive us and give us that energy and connect us with each other, as you say, didn't happen as often as we're used to the past 2+ years.
Right, and we starve. We starve emotionally and spiritually from a lack of those connections.
Right.
And that can have a big effect on our immune system too.
Very true. Tammy Cagle, let me bring you into the conversation too about the work that you do at the hospital, of course, as a licensed clinical social worker, because if somebody is suffering from depression or some other situation, they may find themselves at the hospital, in the hospital, right?
Well, absolutely. So let's focus on the person just for a minute, and before they even get into crisis, what that might look like. A lot of, maybe you're, let's look at some differences. So maybe if you're used to sleeping 6 hours a night, and then now all of a sudden you're sleeping only 4 or 3. Maybe you're waking up in the morning and you just don't feel like getting out of bed and getting into the shower. Things like isolating. Maybe you were somebody who went to church, and now all of a sudden you're not going to church or meeting up with a group of friends, even online. If you have a group online, and all of a sudden you just don't feel like interacting even on that level. Maybe you're more irritable with your friends and family or your children. Your depression looks, maybe you're crying a lot and you're feeling helpless and hopeless. Maybe you're not eating anymore, like you used to. So really, trying to identify, I think even the subtle things like sleep, if it's happening that you're not sleeping one or 2 nights in a week, maybe. But if you're seeing more than that in a week that you're not sleeping well, you may want to think about, what's going on with me.
Sure.
Things like that. So I think it's really important that we do have a little bit of self-monitoring during this time, especially now in February when Christmas is over, it's still cold. Maybe we're still not getting out as much as we should. So those are the types of things that we want to look at before we get into crisis.
Right. And I think that's a great piece of advice. And I know you were mentioning church, and maybe people couldn't go to church as much as they would have liked to, but maybe now they can, but there's something they still don't feel like they want to put the effort into going to church, right? And that could be another thing to be watching for, right?
Right. Well, other things too, maybe you've been home for quite a while, but you were taking those walks every day. And all of a sudden, you're just not doing those things anymore. So those are the types of things that we really want to pay attention to. And I think also you want to monitor if you have other household members and you notice a little subtle change, like your partner's, not sleeping well, or you see someone not eating, you may want to gently ask them, is everything okay? But I've actually noticed some changes in you. Is there anything I can do? Or, helping them create some self-awareness.
Right. And these are things to be aware of year-round, although, as we've said, this month, for whatever reason, tends to be when we sometimes see it more than some of the other months, just for a number of different factors, I suppose, right? But it's really February that this kind of comes into play sometimes.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And Reverend Stetter, talk to me a little bit about some of the things we can look for, because this really, these feelings, this depression, even these suicidal thoughts perhaps with folks, even this month or year-round, we're certainly seeing it here in our community. This is not something that's not happening here. You both were telling me that you see this all too frequently, unfortunately, in your lines of work.
Yes, we see suicidal ideation, and the part that we're seriously concerned about is that it's happening in our younger population. Their families or people that they depend on, they've been distanced from school maybe, and they're just not seeing a future. They're not seeing hope. So it's really important to engage in conversation to make sure people are still connected, to make sure they're knowing that we're going to get past all that's happening and that there is a good future out there. That could help a lot. So the family structure, the adults in their lives who can influence them are extremely important for positive role models. So one of the things I see a lot in the hospital is when people have survived a lot of stress, when they start to get depressed, sometimes grief sets in, and losses that they've had in the past will kind of crash back in on them. And if they're experiencing another loss, and it could be a death, it could be, we've had a lot of house fires this winter. I've seen people who have lost their homes and their animals in fires. It could be loss of a job in the economy and trying to recover financially. It could be loss of a limb due to illness. There are lots of kinds of losses that we have for ourselves and for our families and for those we love. And sometimes that can kind of erode hope away from us. And so one of the things I do ask that Tammy mentioned that we can't talk about enough, and that's sleep. When somebody's experiencing grief and they seem to be on the edge of depression from that grief or the stress, the first thing I say to them is, how's your sleep? And they think a minute and they say, oh yeah, come to think of it, I wake up several times a night. I don't want to go to sleep. I'm dreading going to sleep. And so I say to them, well, contact your primary care physician who knows you best. Get something to help you temporarily through this and past it, because if you don't have sleep, you don't have energy, you don't have appetite. We're learning more and more, I think, every year about how just the basic foundations of sleep and good food and friendship can make our lives whole again.
Interesting. That's such an interesting first step, I guess, to try to identify what's going on with that person, right?
We're always afraid that there's some big complicated exotic fix for things, and when really it's about basics that we know and have done all of our lives.
Right. Tammy Kegel?
Yeah, and the other part of this too is we need to remove stigma. So when I see a lot of people on a unit and they go into crisis, but what happens is they're not able to talk about, I'm feeling like hurting myself. Okay, so if we need to, I think removing stigma around that, and younger folks being able to approach their parents and saying, yeah, I really had these thoughts of hurting myself. Even adults, reaching out to somebody, I just have these thoughts before they go into, because by the time they get to me, there's been an attempt or an overdose, or something that's really harmful. So before that, because of the stigma, because they weren't able to just talk to somebody. So I think education and just having these roundtable conversations can help with removing stigma in the community. And culturally too, we see that people can't talk to their parents. It's never talked about. Even though it's happened in generations. I've seen suicide in generation. It's generational, and still it's not talked about in the family. So I think that's really important that we're able to create a safe space for that.
Very true. And it really crosses over all ethnicities, all economic levels, all ages. We were talking about young people in addition to older folks and middle-aged folks and every age folks. It really doesn't discriminate at all, tragically. And that's the issue. A term that comes to mind that I want to ask you both about too is this term of survivor's guilt. And is that something that maybe can also play a role in some of these things, and maybe these bad things haven't happened to that person, but maybe it's happened to people they know, that maybe I'm the only one left at the office, everybody else got laid off. And now I'm feeling grateful that I have a job, but also bad for my friends and former coworkers who now don't have a job. Or maybe, I lost a family member to COVID, and I'm feeling grateful that I'm not sick, but I feel bad for their family who's lost a loved one, or matriarch or patriarch, or whatever the case may be. Is that something that comes into this conversation as well?
It absolutely does. I see this every day, particularly in the emergency room, and then sometimes when I'm talking with family members, particularly of elderly people for whom they've been caregiving for a long time. What I hear people say is, I feel guilty because I feel like I didn't do enough fast enough. They need to forgive themselves because, after all, we're all human. We do as much as we can, and we can't do more than we can. And nobody, including God, expects us to do more than we are humanly able. But that's a big issue. People get lost in the
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
only ifs, the famous Ben brothers, coulda, woulda, shoulda been, I call them, and the if-onlys and but-ifs, and we just can't go down that rabbit hole because it doesn't serve any good purpose except to make us more depressed and make us harsher critics of ourselves.
Right, but we do until someone like you tells us we shouldn't do that. And that's the issue. Tammy Cagle, is that something that you run into as well?
I
From
do.
folks maybe who aren't dealing with these things maybe themselves. They're still employed, they're still healthy, but they have loved ones or friends who maybe, and they just feel bad about that.
Well, what I run into is at the hospital is people that weren't, well, here's an example. Our family, we didn't get vaccinated, and we lost several members. Right, Linda? And then, so they have this guilt because they're watching their loved one dying in front of them. And so, the advice I give them is that we make decisions based on experience and history, what we've learned. And through this, we're still learning about COVID. We're still learning how, about vaccines. So, and the other part of this is radical acceptance, and that's really just saying, okay, this is what happened, and we cannot change what happened in the past at all. Our behaviors, whatever has happened. What can we do to move on from this point? And maybe visiting the idea of getting everybody vaccinated now that this has happened. Maybe that's a decision based on what they know now.
Right.
So I think it's more about coming together as a community and helping these folks get through what they're getting through. And that could help with survivor's guilt, is having the community come around them. And even like if somebody is the only one left at work, friends and family rally around them, and support that. I think that's, it takes a community.
Very true. Go ahead.
And what Tammy said is just so incredibly important, because all of this survivor's guilt, all of the grief, all of the traumatic stress, all of the lack of communication and the isolation drains what we call our resilience. So resilience, simply put, is just our ability to bounce back. And when we have so many waves of adversity like we've had in the last year, it's hard to bounce back from everything that's happening. And so the good news is that we have an innate ability to have resilience, to bounce back, and we never lose it, even when we're older. We lose a lot of other things in life, but we don't lose our resilience ability, our capacity. But it's like a bank account. We do some things to build it up, and then these other things can come and drain it. And a lot of our resilience is just tapped out.
Yeah, we've had a lot of withdrawals over the last 2 years.
A lot of withdrawals, and some of us feel pretty overdrawn at the moment.
Absolutely.
But the good news is that we can build it back up. And all the things we've been talking about, all the things Tammy's mentioned about finding a safe place to name your fear and your trauma and your hurt, and finding a way back to healthy sleep and healthy eating and connection. And what she also mentioned a while ago is to find a way to learn from. This is huge, finding a way to learn from and benefit from what has happened, no matter how sad. And I have seen a lot of parents who have lost children to COVID. middle-aged children, it's hard to bury your child. It's
Right.
the worst.
Absolutely.
And one of the conversations we have is how you learn from it and what you do to honor the legacy of that person's life. And doing good works will build your resilience balance back like nothing else does. Kindness is just the best medicine for that.
Right.
And that lets them think of life beyond the hurt, and that will help us build resilience.
Right, and that's an important reminder, I think, for folks who have been through these things. And you mentioned numerous times this morning that post-traumatic stress, and that people are dealing with a lot of it. We sometimes just think of that as folks maybe in combat or other types of situations. We don't necessarily think about doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals and EMTs that are dealing with this, or maybe servers at a restaurant who are dealing with this, or retail clerks who are dealing with this. But they're all suffering perhaps from some of this traumatic stress as well, aren't they, during these times?
Yeah, they certainly are. Yeah, our frontline workers are in the thick of it.
They are teachers, cooks, everybody that's working with the public, and even behind the scenes. And what I say is anybody who's suffering from post-traumatic stress, we need to get back to the basics, very basics. We lose part of ourselves somewhat. We don't recognize ourselves sometimes. So getting back to the basics can really help with that. We can start with very simple things such as like self-care. That's something that we do every single day, no matter how we're feeling. Okay, so self-care, it helps with mood regulation. We lose a lot of that with the PTSD. And so, something very simple as taking a 10-minute walk after work every day or in the morning every day. The other thing, journal. Is very basic. Do that 15 minutes a day, but every day.
Just journaling, writing down
Just
how you're
writing
feeling,
down
how
your
you're doing.
thoughts, right? So we're creating, even when we're walking, journaling, we're creating this self-awareness that we've had probably lost a little bit of. And people don't even recognize themselves sometimes. They're like, I don't even know who I am anymore. So getting back to the basics, a little bit at a time will really help with that.
Very good. Reverend Stetter, what did you want to add to that?
Tammy just made me think of something super, super, super important, and that's gratitude. My boss is amazing. She gave us all gratitude journals for New Year's. And every day I write in my gratitude journal, and people, I can tell you from working on the floor, people who can say thank you and feel grateful for something, they heal better, they live longer. There's something about that gratitude that just kind of puts us back together again, and that's easy to do. That's something we all can do.
Right. And that reminds me of another term that I don't hear used maybe often enough these days, which I really wish it would be, which is empathy. And is that something too? I think we've kind of lost a little bit of that. This is me talking, not anybody else, over the last couple of years. But empathy towards our fellow human beings, and I just don't see that enough. I'd like to see more of it, I guess, is my point, everybody. So message to you, audience, that we'd like to see more empathy in our communities throughout this period. But is that something too that we can all do better with?
I think so. That goes back to what we said earlier about just paying attention and noticing that somebody's having a little bit of a struggle, and having the courage, that's part of empathy, having the courage just to come out and say, hey, you're my friend, I value you, I really want to help you, I'm seeing something. But the opposite has also happened, Scott, and that's empathy fatigue, because a lot of us who started putting groceries on front doorsteps and giving a little more to church so we can, and frontline workers who are trying harder to help people. In some cases, our empathy's gotten tired, and we need to give ourselves a little break. So we need a balance of the two. Yeah, there are people that need to step up and exercise their empathy a little bit more, and then there are people who need to say, I don't have to do it all the time, and it's okay to take a little bit of a break.
Good point. Very good point. We just have a couple of minutes remaining this morning, both of you, and so I'd like to just leave the audience with some great words of advice or things to watch for here during the rest of this month. We have Valentine's Day coming up, as you mentioned, and I think we can all be a little more loving and understanding with each other these days. But this is a tough month for people, and unfortunately, the numbers don't lie, and February can be rough to get through. So, Tammy Cagle, what would be your words of advice for the folks who are watching and listening to us this morning?
don't be so hard on yourself. Take time off if you feel like you're burning out at work or even with your family. Take some time for yourself. And I think most importantly, self-care every single day. Practice self-care, even if it's for 10 or 15 minutes a day. If you see somebody struggling, reach out to that person. And, and I think just, spending a little extra time out in the fresh air.
That's always good.
Yes.
And we're grateful that we live in a place where we can do that mostly year round. So that's important as well. Reverend Stetter, what's your words of advice for us this morning?
Well, I think we all know that life can be pretty tough sometimes, and we need to help each other through. That's my big advice. And so if you need to find a safe place to help yourself through and to ask people to help you through, the hospital would love to be your Valentine on this Valentine's Day. We have lots of help. We can connect you to lots of places, and we need to be each other's best Valentines this next week, and connect with people we haven't connected with a while, and reach out and exercise that empathy a little bit, and just do random acts of kindness.
That's always good. And it doesn't have to be February, maybe for that.
That's
year
right.
round. There
That's
you
right.
are. Thank you both for coming in this morning. Tammy Cagle, I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Reverend Stetter, always a pleasure. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you. Thank you both very much. And happy Valentine's Day to both of you.
Thank you.
My guest this morning here on KSJE. KSJE and San Juan College present the Student Success Coaching Tip of the Week.
Hello, this is M&Chi bringing you week 4 of Coaching Tips of the Week. This week is resources. There are many resources available on our college campus, both physically and online. Be sure to know these valuable resources if you are unsure of their availability. Do an online search using your college website. If you cannot find the resources on your own, be sure to contact the Student Achievement Center in room 1604. Resources can be found in the following areas: Library Services, Native American Center, Herencia and Latina Center, the Student Achievement Center, the Career Center, Trio Center /Edge, Tutoring Center, the Veteran Center, Financial Aid Office, Advising, the Counseling Center, Disability Services, Business Office, and the Dean of Students, and more.
The Student Success Coaching Tip of the Week, presented by KSJE and the Student Achievement Center at San Juan College. KSJE is supported by the Farmington Civic Center, bringing a full slate of entertainment to Farmington and San Juan County. Dancing with the Farmington Stars, Saturday, February 19th at 7 p.m. The Farmington Civic Center, 200 West Arrington in downtown Farmington. Find out more online at fmtn.org/shows or at 505-599-1148.